My strategy into getting into where I am now was actually just playing as many shows as possible. When I first started, there wasn't social media didn't really exist. There wasn't really a way to get other people to see you playing without physically playing in front of them. So I was in this rock band and I would just play in any place that had a piano that allowed me to play. And I would go to even dueling piano bars and they would have open mics and I would go in there and just train on the piano, not really singing so much, but just really trying to hone in on my skill. And I would play show after show, warehouse parties, house parties, dive bars, the airliner, the whiskey, the just kind of all of it. And the funny thing about that is I got the Selena Gomez gig because the music director's wife saw me at one of those shows and kind of threw my name into the hat of this major, major pop star that I actually didn't even know I was up for. So I received this message on Facebook message that's like, oh, hey, I saw you perform. Are you down to possibly work for an artist? Without very much information, I just said yes. I was taking literally any gig that came my way. Didn't matter who it was. And I receive a song. I'm like, this voice sounds a little familiar. Show up to center staging and I meet Selena. And I was like, oh, this is just kind of a large pop star. And honestly, that was my very, very first experience in a major pop setting. But I think it's kind of interesting that that came from playing the grungy shows and actually just really kind of hitting the pavement, hustling the way that I was in my 20s. And so I was about 26, 27 when I got that first gig. So that's kind of how it all started. The biggest thing that I did to prepare was basically mostly programming and knowing gear and knowing keyboards aside from just piano. I started out as a purely classical pianist. I knew how to read. I could read anything in front of me, sheet music. I could play the piano, but when it came to actually playing keyboards, making sounds, working with sound design, learning a song by ear even, all of that was brand new territory to me. And it took me a minute to realize that that was it, like mostly the biggest part about being a working keyboard player in pop music. So I went to Musicians Institute. I took some programming classes. I absolutely fell in love with sound design. I loved making my own sounds. I loved beefing up live shows, adding my own flavor, adding my own thing. I learned how to my very first workstation was a Phantom G8. I just got in there, learned all kind of the basics, and then was able to kind of get used to pretty quickly adapting to new gear. And that I think was what really helped me. And then as I got more into that, I never play sitting down. I'm always kind of just trying to bring my own energy to it. And I think that the mixture between getting away from just the classical piano part and getting into the gear and performance side of it was something that was new to me. And I think that is what kind of helped me get to the next level. My current rig that I use in the Post Malone show is I have a Jupiter 80, I have a Phantom 7, I have an RD88, and I have a sequential Prophet 6. And the way that we're using this rig in this particular tour is 2 of the boards are being used just as MIDI controllers. The Prophet 6 I'm using as analog, and the Phantom 7 I'm playing it out of audio. So I'm actually using the Jupiter as a MIDI controller, and which is a little strange, but I love, love, love the action on it. And then also I have it just in case I want to move to audio, I can program that thing with my eyes closed. So that's kind of what I'm using. And to be honest, that's the rig that I kind of have liked the best. The Prophet 6 is that's my toy that I get to have fun with. I get to add whatever I want. I get to make the crunchiest, gnarliest sounds for certain things. And it's really easy to kind of mess with like different filters and stuff in real time live that I actually do on stage. The RD88 is a fully weighted 88 keyboard that I use as just a MIDI controller. But I built all the sounds that I use come from the Ableton session, but that is my rig for anything that's like an electric piano, an acoustic piano, anything that needs that weight. That is always really important for me to have within a rig for a show like Post, where he does have a lot of piano elements within his songs. When I was on tour with Halsey, I was also doing key bass. So my rig was a lot different because I needed an extra hand to do all of the low end. So with that rig, it was a lot smaller. I had a Prophet X and a Prophet 6, everything that wasn't key bass. And then I had a Sub 37, and I was doing all of the key bass. I think there were maybe a few songs where we had bass guitar, a guitarist would play bass. But so that rig was a completely different world because I was doing all of the low end aside from the melodic stuff, and there wasn't as many piano elements within that show, so I didn't need a weighted board. So it really depends on the artist, it depends on the show, it obviously depends on whether I'm playing key bass or not, and that kind of is what adjust my rig. So I've actually never done a show where I've used the same rig twice. It very much depends on the gig. So for example, when I came into the Halsey tour, all of the sounds had already been made because she had been using a lot of the same set. So, and I came into that gig really late. So a lot of the stuff was already made, and then we kind of would go through and adjust everything. Everything's coming from the Ableton session. So all of those sounds are being triggered by Ableton. And another thing that we have done rather than using a VST is we've actually taken samples, chopped them up, throw them on the different keys when it's something that's super, super specific to the song rather than actually recreating the sound itself. So that's something that we do a lot. In the Post show, that is something the music directors kind of took charge of doing a lot of the making of the various sounds. However, we would kind of go through and do a little bit of surgery on the set to see what was playable and what was not, because there's, you know, every keyboard player knows sometimes you get that one sound that's a huge part of the song, but it's not realistically playable. So we kind of have to go through and make those decisions, but everything MIDI wise is coming from the Ableton session. So the best way to stay current about, you know, just being a musician is listening to the new artists, listening to kind of what's coming out, what's getting popular, and, you know, being in touch with pop culture. I'm 36 years old, so the music that I listen to in my own time is maybe a little different than what is the most current. However, I really kind of go out of my way to see what artists are touring with who. Also, I like to see which artists that I feel like I would fit into their show the best, because I'm not for everyone, and I think that it's really important as a musician to realize that not every single gig is your gig. There are certain things that I fit in way better than others. A perfect example is Post Malone show. I feel like that's where I fit in my opinion, the best so far out of the gigs that I've done. Once I started working with him, getting really familiar with his music, therefore getting really familiar with artists that are connected to him, or artists that would open with him, or artists on the same festival bill. So that's kind of what I really focus on. And also watching other shows, you know, seeing the live performances that are happening, watching tours on YouTube, or getting an idea of how live music is being portrayed from an album. I think that's a big part of staying current onto kind of what's happening in the touring world. So in terms of practicing, I will definitely admit that I spend a lot of time learning new songs and learning new sets. So that is actually where I get most of my practice. When I have a really long break, say I'm home for a few months, I will go back to my classical roots. I will open up Beethoven's Sonata Pathétique, Opus 13, number 8, and go back to playing it just so I can kind of get more in touch of why I fell in love with music in the first place. I think that's really important, and that actually has nothing to do with really what I do for work. That's just kind of for me. And that is something I like to do in my own time, because when it comes to practicing for work, you know, I'll get an Ableton session and have 3 weeks or 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever to learn someone's set, and that is like sometimes 12 hours a day, sometimes 8 hours a day. And that's where I usually get most of like the exercise of my brain and that part of me that I need for actual work. But I do try to make time to go back to my classical roots. I love classical music, and that's what raised me in a sense. So I try to really balance it with both. The thing that makes me unique as a keyboard player that I have heard from other people is that I love being extremely high energy. I love to perform. I love connecting with the artist. I love connecting with the crowd. I love jumping around like a crazy person, really, really getting into the music. I never, ever, ever sit down. I'm offended if I see a bench, but that's something that I really learned in my like rock music days. And so when I started working with pop artists, and I kind of brought that same vibe to a stage where, you know, I'm not just sitting in the corner, or I'm not just, you know, hiding behind a wall of keyboards. I think that's what kind of made me different. And kind of a great example of that is, this is kind of a funny story, is when we were doing the Post Malone gig and we were setting up my rig, I noticed that the keyboard stands that were being used, I could tell, I was like, I don't know if these are gonna hold given how much I jump around on stage. And lo and behold, it was not. So we actually went in and I had custom Gibraltar racks built for me the day before our final production rehearsal that had to pass the jump test, as one would say. And I think that, which was kind of a funny situation, but it is true, because in order to kind of bring that element to a show, you know, you need the proper rig to do so. And I really think that's what set me apart from other keyboard players, is that I am not afraid to really, really get in there and vibe with the crowd. The best piece of advice I think I've ever gotten, which sounds very cliche, but it's to not burn bridges. And to not burn bridges with, if you're working with an artist that doesn't work out, or a music director that might not fit your vibe, or you get let go because they were looking for somebody else. I think it's really, really important to stay true to yourself and to not burn bridges, and to not let rejection keep you from going forward, because it's going to happen. And obviously that's easier said than done, but I have been rejected so many times for various reasons before I was able to land my first big gig. Even after that, it took a really long time for me to not let those things get to me, and to be like, all right, that gig wasn't for me. Let's keep going. Because anytime I've had those moments of doubt where I'm like, oh, this artist didn't want me, I don't know if this profession is for me, I would have a mentor be like, what are you doing? Keep going, get the next one. It's really just to keep going. And I know that sounds super cliche, but rejection sucks at the end of the day. It just sucks. But if you move past it, it does make you have thicker skin. And then nowadays, if I don't get a gig, which very recently happened to me, I got the Post Malone thing 3 weeks later, and that was a way better fit for me than the gig I had lost previously. If I had not received that advice, I don't know if I would have really jumped on these other opportunities. The biggest piece of advice I would give to a keyboard player or any musician in order to have this kind of career is, number one, find what makes you unique. Don't try to be like anybody else, and just see what really vibes with you, what speaks to you, what is the thing. There are keyboard players that are master sound designers that may not have the virtuoso playing skills. There might be people with that playing skill that don't really know sound design as well, but various gigs want different things. So learn as much as you can, but also be aware of the thing that you fit into the best, because then you can grow in other ways, but that's a really great way to get your foot in the door.